Hi everyone, good morning. Welcome to the session of human rights. We have today with us our speakers, Luis Hernandez, Isabella Leo Aguilar, if I speak her name, pronounce her name good. We also got some two speakers more, but I think due to some technical issues, they are not able to join yet. So whenever they are able, we're putting them on stage. The topic today is human rights. Human rights are the cornerstone of dignity, justice, and equality. Yet, young people around the world continue to face violations that limit their potential. Today's conversation is about how youth are not just the future, but active defenders of rights, challenging injustice, defending vulnerable groups, and pushing for accountability both locally and globally. I'm delighted to have such a diverse panel with us together. Our two speakers for now. And to begin with, I would like to invite each of you to briefly introduce yourself. Who you are, where are you from, what is your professionally, what are you doing professionally, and maybe also some kind of social or in social engaged working. Anything you would like to share, the floor is all yours. We will start with Luis. Can you please share who you are and let the speaker know who is Luis? So the floor is all yours, Luis.
Thank you. Well, hello everyone. My name is Luis Alberto Hernandez Flores. I'm 22 years old. I am Mexican. Here in Mexico is 6:42 a.m. So maybe that's why some speakers are late. Maybe there was a misunderstood on the schedule. But well, I am an advocate. I'm currently studying laws at Tecnológico de Monterrey and economics at the National University of Mexico. And well, through this journey, I have realized that formal mechanisms are not always enough to fulfill the exercise of human rights. And therefore, I have orientated my profile towards maybe a more political way of acting. So I have organized some massive mobilizations here in Mexico when violations to human rights are given. And public activism and youth are, I think that they have to be interconnected. So that's why I have participated in these mobilizations and demonstrated that here in Mexico the voice of youth needs to be heard. At the end of the day, we are the future, and if our voice is not taken into consideration seriously, well, there is no future to be even talking about. And yes, I have shared my experience in some international national forums, international, like, I don't know, the New York Times and Forbes Mexico, and I have also shared my perspective in TEDx Talk, some other conferences. And I would love to learn also from Isabella. I would have loved to hear from the other two panelists. But yeah, I'm at their service, and I hope that my experience is enrichful to the audience.
Thank you very much, Luis. I will give the floor to Isabella. Please tell the viewers who Isabella is, and so we can continue further. Thank you.
Hello, Renuka. Thank you very much. Luis, it is a pleasure to share this space with you. My name is Isabela. I'm an international attorney. So I'm a practicing attorney in Mexico, and I just recently finished my LLM degree at Harvard Law School. In the LLM degree, my specialization was in human rights, international law, and negotiations, which is a big focus that I have. Back in Mexico, as an attorney, I participated a lot in activism and politics, mainly oriented towards matters regarding gender equality and ecological issues. There's a very big movement organized mainly by youth in my city, which is Monterrey, called Un Río en el Río. I'm one of the practicing attorneys who has one of the legal processes there. And I have participated in processes that have aided the Supreme Court in Mexico to eliminate the tax on menstrual hygiene products, with an argument that imposing a tax on menstrual hygiene products is both discriminatory and against human rights. Essentially, through my journey, I have mostly been inspired and guided by other youth people participating in social movements and human rights issues, as Luis said, it is very hard for youth to be taken seriously, mostly, I would argue. It is easy for us to get heard, but not easy for our words and our actions to be taken into consideration for practical political and material change in our communities and society. So I hope the experience I bring along through practical litigation and grassroots camp- grassroots campaigning can help others learn from these experiences, but also grow and be sure that as long as we take seriously what we do and are passionate about what we want to achieve, great things can happen, even if others still are trying to ignore our voices. We are not, as youth, we are not the future, we're the present, we're here, and we want things to be better.
Thank you, Isabella. So, both thank you for your introductions, and let's continue our panel session today of human rights. And with this, I would like to begin with the first question for you guys. Um, from your perspectives, what are the most urgent human rights issues facing young people today? So, I will repeat the question. From your perspective, what are the most urgent human rights issues young people face today? Luis, would you like to be the first one?
Sure. Well, I believe that being young in itself is an additional layer of intersectionality. And well, for those one that are less familiar with the term, intersectionality refers to the multiple social identities that shape the way through which each person accesses their rights. And youth in itself is one of those layers. Well, depending on the age, the vulnerability can be more severe. Let's think, for example, in children who require constant care because they cannot fully be self-sufficient. But even adolescents and young adults, many of us lack the economical, political, or social means to effectively claim our rights. Too often, young people here in Mexico, at least, are recruited by the organized crime, and they have no option but to join them. Or when they try to speak up, when we try to speak up, we are simply not taken seriously. And I think that this is the most serious violation to human rights we can well perceive, because as Isabella said, it's not that we do not raise our voice. It's not that we are not being heard, but it's that we are not taken seriously. I share my own experience, for example, here in Mexico in last year, in response to the judicial reform. Many of us made uh, our voices be heard, but our presence was simply instrumentalized. We were invited to the Senate, photos were taken with us, but our opinions were never treated with real seriousness. Even by the opposition, the political opposition, we were never taken seriously. We were only be tokenized to legitimize their discourse. And that reflects a broader issue, that youth is frequently used to amplify political narratives, but we are not genuinely taken into consideration, and our necessities are not being truly heard. So to me, the most urgent human rights issue that youth faces today is that not only these violations rise for our condition as youth, but also the persistent lack of recognition of our voices.
Thank you, Luis. So if I can connect on that, how would you think that the human rights can promote youth empowerment? So how can human rights promote, in fact, youth empowerment?
For me again, well, I think that knowing, not only for youth, I think that knowing human rights, like in all of its contexts, can empower people to make their rights be exercised. I mean, how can we let's think, for example, I was talking about labor works. How can a mother be make um exercise their right to care if they didn't even know that the human right care, to be cared, and to auto care. Sorry if my translation is bad. If she didn't know that this right itself exists. So I think that for youth, educational content, especially those ones that do not have access to the education of human rights, can empower young people. But I think that knowing human rights can empower everyone. Therefore, we knowing our human rights, we can identify the violation that we are perceiving. And that's why I think that knowing about human rights can empower everyone, not only youth.
Thank you, Liz. So we talked about access to education. So the question is here: how can access to quality education be ensured for all youth, particularly in marginalized communities? So this is a question from one of our viewer. As the topic you raise access to education, so um, I'm trying to get that again from you. Thank
Well, it's a very difficult issue here in Mexico, at least, because we have many indigenous communities that do not have even access to electricity. So we cannot talk about digital access to education. So I think that some sustainable models of education have to be taken. For example, yes, in the indigenous um, populations per se, they do not have electricity, but some the capitals of the states do have access to these means, even if they are like uh, not as good as they should be. But I think that, for example, we can use technology to have, for example, massive classes in these urban centers, especially in those situations where indigenous people cannot access directly from their communities. And yes, this do not solve by itself the problem of lack of education in these communities, because they still have to translate to those urban cities. But I think that at least it's an approach to solving this issue of lack of education. Because I have, for example, litigated in cases of indigenous people where they do not have access to information, and there's where the true violation come from. They didn't even know that their rights were even being violated, especially, for example, in terms of environmental damages. So I think that at least we have to make some approaches, even if they are not perfect. I think that we have to encourage the education of these people that do not have access to any means of education. I think that the cost of opportunity is great.
you. Thank you, Luis. So we're going to Isabella. I would like to ask you the question. How have youth-led movements successfully defended or advanced human rights in recent years? How have you seen that in the recent years?
Thank you, Renuka. Well, first we have to understand what we see as human rights, right? And what do we consider an advancement or a progression of human rights in this context? So, human rights are those born from the inherent dignity of us, of people, in that sense that they come from a context where we understand them to be natural rights in a way. It's not that a state it's granting us these rights. It's that a state has to recognize that they exist as part of a human condition. That's why they're so relevant. The right to life, the right to health, the right to freedom. All of these concepts come inherently from our human nature. So it's not really on a matter of whether they are advancing or not. It's a matter of progression in recognition and of progression in getting guaranteed ways in which the states either respect them by not intervening or intervene in order to grant more. So it looks kind of like opposing in that context, but I will explain because it depends on the nature of the human right that we're analyzing particularly. So, for example, the case of Un Río en el Río, which is the earlier movement I was talking about. Un Río en el Río is a movement of ecological protection that started in my city in Monterrey. Monterrey is going to be one of the host cities for FIFA 2026 alongside Mexico City, Guadalajara, and US cities and in Canada. We have a wonderful river that's currently, it's not a dry river. There's a false narrative that it's a dry river, but really it has water flowing. Water flows a lot under it. And the government wanted to take down 26 kilometers squares. I'm sorry for those who speak in miles, I don't. But 26 kilometers squares of trees planted in this river. This river naturally, after a hurricane, destroyed all the infrastructure it had in its way, and it had this forest hybrid that emanated from it. And the government wanted to take what we as citizens, especially as youth, consider to be our natural, unique urban lung. Our city is a very industrialized city. It suffers from contamination, and that's one of the few areas that it's totally green. What did we do? We formed a coalition of different associations, groups of interests, youth, and specialized people who got together in order to stop this movement. This started about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and right now the government has already made a promise to declare the river as a natural protected area. We stopped the project that was meant to build a road to make it faster for people arriving to the airport to get over to the stadium where the games at FIFA 2026 are going to be happening. So it is through pressure, through organization, but especially by becoming so disgustingly prepared that the authorities have no option but to listen to us. And by being prepared, it's by having a multidisciplinary team. So I am a lawyer. My expertise is in the laws. What I can do is litigate. That's what I offer the group. But there's other people such as Andy Villarreal, who if you search her online has amazing cinematic content that help create content, videos and documentaries made by herself through National Geographic, exposing the diversity of fauna and flora within the river bench. By protecting this river, we guarantee a safer environment, we guarantee levels of health because trees clean our air, and we showcase that our freedom of expression, our freedom to protest, our freedom of reunion, and our freedom to choose how our governments act in a democratic system is something that has to be taken seriously, not just something that's well written on the books and that's nicely seen. Another movement, for example, that's been happening around the world has been the Fridays for Future down in this ecological context. The Fridays for Future have generated huge consensus internationally. People agree with the movement, people disagree with the movement and the methods. What's important is that they created waves, because if we're something as youth, it's digital natives. We are great communicators. We know how to share stories, we know how to share ideas, and we know how to research. All the knowledge we can ever want, it's at the reach of our fingertips. And we're the first generation to be able to have this. By using this information smartly and being able to process it, bring it down from a technical level into an everyday to day language, and being able to pressure both our authorities, our governments, but to mobilize also our colleagues, adults, children, and all types of people, we can create a strong, sustainable, and maintained change right now, not for the future.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you very much for that real good explanation to say. Yes, I think our viewers really enjoy our session. If I see the comment. Okay, so you talked about freedom. So I was thinking there's always about, yes, we always have something like um, violation of human rights. So can freedom maybe the reason that gives people the courage to violate human rights, or are there maybe some other factors that you see or that you practice law? I get if I hear that right. So is there something that you see in your profession like, or you can explain us? Is it freedom maybe, or something other factors that help together that violate human rights, and why people are encouraged to violate human rights as it is so much important?
Okay, I love this question because it takes us to a very core element of human rights law. A lot of people believe human rights to be absolute. Human rights are not absolute. And that might seem controversial, but I will explain. Human rights are both interdependent and indivisible. What does this mean? Human rights depend on each other to be able to coexist. For example, the case that Luis was making about the woman who needed the right to care and she needed to work, there's a human right to dignified work. There's a human right to receive care. There's a human right um, to be able to choose freely the type of life you want. However, if, for example, the human right to health is denied to this woman, she won't be able to work. She won't be able to afford the care that her child needs. And therefore, affecting one human right will generate a chain of events that will inevitably affect other human rights. But there's also instances in which, by guaranteeing one human right, you have to restrict other human rights. This in order to guarantee the most scope of human rights by doing a minimum limiting as possible. This is what in the legal system is understood as a ponderation. Originally, this theory was from Alexi, but in the matter of ponderation is, for example, if we have two human rights that go against each other, for example, let's say there's a human right to security, and there's a human right to freedom to protest. What happens when protests become violent? The state has a legitimate interest to control the violence of the protest, to guarantee the safety, the health, and the life of the people both involved in the protest and around. The question is, when does that limitation becomes too much of a limitation? So definitely freedom is a factor in the sense that people are free to choose and to act, but freedom is also limited to a certain degree. For example, I am not free to steal the goods of another person because that person has a right to property. That's a strict limit on freedom. However, there's also a freedom restricted from those in government and in action. That's why we have constitutions. That's why we have governments. In order to restrict the exercise of power, people who are in government are not free to recklessly use that power to oppress the people and to violate human rights. Therefore, it is a factor. I believe what would affect mostly is people in power believing their either agenda, their ideologies, their movements, or their simply exercise of power, either for financial gain or political gain, to be more important than the human rights of their people. I don't believe that there's people who are genuinely evil and will say, I woke up today wishing to violate human rights. No one wakes up with that thought. But people do justify their actions, seeing themselves as the good guy, without doing an in depth analysis of where this limit, which is very hard to determine at times, really lies. And it is when the persons feel this affection, this direct affliction to their human dignity, where we feel it in our core, because again, human rights come from our human nature, that we react and we oppose these limitations. And that's kind of how we see this line, this frontier, if you will, of what we allow as a society and what we restrict as a society, being slowly shifted in a slow progression in what's guaranteed and respected in a lower context. I'm gonna very fast close this idea, for example, with the idea of slavery in the United States. We know that in the United States there was a moment where slavery was legal. This does not mean that the people who were brought from Africa into the United States did not have a human right to freedom. It meant that they had that their right to freedom was not being respected. It doesn't mean that it did not exist. It doesn't mean that they did not have it. It means that the government was, with institutions and with laws, limiting their exercise to this human right. So that's how we have to understand human rights. It's not that we're advancing or granting more human rights or inventing or creating them. It's that we're recognizing them as inherently human, and as we feel these violations within the context of our human dignity, we amplify that scope of protection.
Thank you very much, Isabella. So I would like to ask Luis, yes, about human rights. You see, in some countries, human rights are marginalized to gender and race. What do you have to say about this?
Sorry, Renuka, can you repeat your question, please?
Yes, in some countries, human rights are marginalized to gender and race. Even in 2025. We are so far with technology, with everything around us, so far with development, but we still see in some countries human rights are marginalized through gender and race. And that is very sad to hear, of course. What do you have to say that
So,
for
so
that?
marginalized
Yes,
agenda.
it due to gender like female, male, and um due to some certain race like culture, religion. So there is still like human rights violation. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, the violation of human rights have greater impact in the extent of the vulnerability of the person that suffers it. If again we can return again to the concept of intersectionality, if a woman, a black woman, a black poor woman suffers violation to human rights, their access to justice can be more difficult in the extent that she has some intersectionality layers that are not letting her access to justice or being recognized that her rights are being violated. I think that first of all, we have to be critical about these layers and why they exist, and why are they barriers to access the true exercise of human rights. Let's see, for example, in the barrier of language. Most human rights debates are given in English. How can a Mayan person, a person that speaks Nahuatl, make activism if they do not have the access to the education to learn how to speak English, for example, or even Spanish here in Mexico? So how are their voices being going to be heard if they do not have the means through which they can make this activism? And therefore, activism becomes rather a privilege or a sacrifice, depending on the person that wants to make it or that needs to make it in some cases.
Thank you, Luis. So we will continue with the next question about what barriers prevent young activists from fully participating in human rights advocacy and how can we address these? So I will repeat the question. What barriers prevent young activists from fully participating in human rights advocacy and how can we address these? Isabella, can I give you this question and we would like to know what your perspective is on this? Thank you.
Okay, so in regards to restrictions to access and participation in human rights, there's a restriction that we had talked about at the very beginning, which is the economical restriction. A lot of youth do not have the funds to self sustain or to push forth their activism. Advocacy, litigations, all of these processes, lobbying, policy building, it requires resources. It requires education. A lot of people do not have access to any of this. I used to work in government before. I have worked in activism and I have worked in the corporate world. And most of the times, what I realized when people came, and not only youth, but generally people who wanted to push forth great ideas that could actually help people, would go with the wrong authority, not understanding what each authority was meant to do. So, for example, I was working in the legislative branch and I would receive petitions in order to implement policies in regards to how hospitals are managed. I was in the local state congress. That's not a pejorative that I had in the local state congress. That was a pejorative that the federal executive branch had. So, right redirection to the correct authority to whom petitioned this was important. So, that's one instance. Another instance is the opportunities that are there for professionalization in matters of human rights. Human rights is often seen as a political agenda, which it is in many instances. I am not saying human rights are not political. Everything, every personal element of our lives becomes political. Um, but it is a very technical branch, and sometimes we speak about this technical branch from a very popularized way of seeing things, in the sense that we will talk about it not knowing about the theory, not knowing about the limits, not knowing about the legal aspects that human rights have, which are very real and very present. And because there are very seldom opportunities to work in spaces or to receive education in matters regarding human rights, and most of the workspaces that are there are unpaid, such as the United Nations internships, youth cannot develop this core knowledge unless they have the experience. And so programs are expensive, opportunities create a barrier to access that only certain privileged portion of the population can access through their own personal funds. Um, Especially the United Nations, which is still not paying the interest, is one of the main reforms that has been pushed forth by the youth within the United Nations for many years now. Um, and also the fact that sometimes speaking up comes with great repression from different nations. So there's political persecution, there is violence. A lot of youth still live with their parents and still depend on family members. And it is this fear, not being able to separate yourself from the consequences and the consequences that can befall on your family when you fall into activism, that might create a matter of self censorship in matters that we're truly passionate about. We just recently saw the revolution in Nepal. They changed the government in less than 72 hours by organizing themselves, by raising their voice through access to digital mediums, being able to elect a new leader in less than 24 hours through a Discord chat. These are innovations, these are digital access. You would have had to need someone who had the technical knowledge on how to manage a Discord server, how to effectively moderate it, how to ensure no accounts are being repeated in order for that election to be essential. Therefore, most of the times it's this lack of information, this lack of resources, this lack of political and social power. The youth we usually see being successful in matters regarding human rights activism and advocacy are youth who have had to overcome such hardships. We have, for example, Malala Yousafzai, who, for being a woman, asking for her right to education, which in many countries would seem as very basic, but was not her reality, was shot in the head for seeking to have one of her human rights complied with by the government. So it's not an easy price, and not only in the economical sense. It is a very tough personal expense dedicating to these matters. When you truly believe in them, when you go full on with your morals and values, and when you truly are convinced that change is worth the price that you're likely to pay with personal elements, with financial elements, and with all sorts of resources. Um, Sometimes self censorship is our own worst enemy. We're afraid to be cringe in today's digital world. We're afraid to be perceived as someone who can be canceled. We worry that our words have to be the exact correct words to say and do not engage in effective communication. We no longer hold dialogues. We have echo chambers where we say something and the algorithm will send it to people who agree with us and do not debate our ideas. So we seldomly think outside of the box or outside from our own personal experiences to grow within the opportunities that we have nowadays. And we should learn how to manage these resources, how to use these tools effectively, but also learn that none of us have the full truth or all the correct information on anything we dare to speak on. Today, obviously, it's in spaces like this where I present myself, for example, as an attorney, as a human rights international attorney, it's easy for people to perceive me as an authority. I don't have the full truth about these issues. It is okay to debate and go against what I say to you or from what you're learning from me. It's okay to do your own research and see if these ideas reason. From where I come from, it's a position from academia, which is also a very privileged position. So therefore, I might not know the full reality or extension some advocates face, not coming from the same scope of privilege that I am being able to speak from. But there's some elements of truth to what I say and from my experiences. And by listening and mixing it with other diverse experiences is how youth can overcome these restrictions in their exercise of activism and advocacy in human rights.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you very much. So we got a lot of comments in. So very good, insightful session. Um, I will continue with the last two questions for our speakers. How can international institutions, including the United Nations, better protect youth human rights defenders at risk? So I will repeat the question once again. How can international institutions, including the United Nations, better protect youth human rights defenders at risk? So, Luis, if you can want to answer this question for our viewers, and then you can continue to the last question, the wrap-up question, and the next part is to answer some of those questions of our viewers. There are a lot of questions coming in, so it's really interesting. The floor is yours, Luis.
Sure. I think that the most important contribution that international institutions can give is to provide an external voice, an external, in the most preferable way, independent voice in countries where government use the argument of popular sovereignty to justify human rights violations. This is a common narrative, and I use Mexican experience as an example, and that any criticism from broad is labeled as foreign interference. Let's think, for example, in, again, Mexican examples as García Rodríguez y otros contra México, or Son Pantes de Texpile y otros contra México, which are two cases from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, where this organ condemned the Mexican state to expose from the constitution to juridical figures, prisión preventiva oficiosa y el arraigo. Sorry if I cannot translate it, but I think maybe Saula can help me in the translation. But the reality is that sovereignty is often weaponized by authoritarian governments to silence accountability. And this is especially dangerous when we, youth, are in the front lines. We have faced pepper sprays in protest. We have been exposed to abuse. I was even menaced by the president of the Senate. And therefore, we are more vulnerable to repression. But we have to be also critical about to which extent can international organizations, including the UN, can help us, because we cannot ignore that the structural limitation of international system. Let's think, for example, in the UN Security Council that has this veto power of victorious states of past wars, bellical contexts, that at the end of the day, they paralyze action towards preventing or attending human rights violation. This means that the international voice is often captured by geopolitical and economical interests. So at the end of the day, if we have rights and they are being recognized, not granted, to which extent do international institutions help to 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 the exercise of human rights if they are captured by economical interests? So I think that they have many advantages, but they cannot be used until they become truly popular, at least to the population, that they can think, okay, if my human rights are being violated, I can go to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, or I can go to the UN to expose my case. We cannot talk about the true impact of the international system until we can recognize that status.
Thank you, Luis. So I have a question for Isabella, and yes, the question is, what innovative tools, digital platforms, art, or education do you see as most powerful in amplifying youth voices in the human rights arena? Um, I will repeat the question again. What innovative tools do you see as the most powerful in amplifying youth voices in the human rights arena? If you think of education, digital platforms, and technology, um, what are your perspective? And so, if Isabella has answered the question, we can give the floor to Luis and then come to the wrap-up question.
Thank you, Renuka. I will answer very quickly because I do have to leave the session briefly to run to the in-person session. So
Yeah.
anyone who's online that will be in the in-person sessions in a second, see you there. Um, but essentially, the digital spaces, as I said earlier, we are digital natives, and that's a great advantage that we have over other generations. The big disadvantage is that social media is oversaturated. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of misinformation. So, by being responsible content creators when you're in advocacy spaces and being able to share information in a technical, truthful, and technical, easy to understand way, that's a great way to advance human rights matters. That's how Un Rio en el Rio grew. That's how the Nepal Revolution just happened. That's how Fridays for Future became popular internationally as a movement led by Greta Thunberg. Um, Social media is a great tool, but it's that. It's a tool. We don't have to ignore the fact that artificial intelligence will not have the answers. Artificial intelligence is not intelligence at all, it's not thinking. It's a predictive model. It will tell you the best next thing that's algorithmically likely to come from an idea, but it's not a full thought process, and it has biases within itself. It is that human element, again, human rights is a natural element from human dignity that will translate these complex issues into palpable material change. And it is through these digital tools, both for security purposes like VPNs or encryption data, and social media, whether you want to show your face or not, being able to choose a strategy, learn how to communicate effectively, learn marketing elements, and be sure that you're responsible and ethical with the information and contexts that you share. I personally share legal context in both Spanish and English. So in my social media in English, at legallycurly_mx is where I share my academic and professional experience as an international lawyer, and I sometimes share information about human rights, international law, international news, and matters of such. In Spanish, it's at lablegal.co, where I share information to a Spanish audience about how legal institutions work, about these processes, where I try to be as unbiased as possible for people to generate their own positions, their own ideas from an unbiased perspective that the media sometimes doesn't fully understand because they are not lawyers who have the technical expertise, or the politicians sharing official information do not fully share because they have a political agenda that they want to share. So that's going to be my intervention for now because I really do want to run. But I want to thank you very much, Renuka, for this time and space. Prachit, I also know she's around here. Thank you very much for considering this participation. And Luis, it was great to share this space with you. I will leave the session to both of you.
Thank you very much, Isabella. That was really great, and our viewers have enjoyed a lot. So thank you very much for your time, and I wish you all the very best and all much success. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
I will be
Thank you,
running.
Bella.
Yes, sure. So we'll continue our wrap up part with Luis. So Luis, I have a wrap up question for you. If you could design one reform to make the global human rights system more youth inclusive, what would it be?
Well, I think that in the international institutions where, well, prevention of violation of human rights is pretended, I think that some state could give some type of economical grant in case of human rights violation, so that when they are condemned to repair those human rights violations, they can take those funds to repair it, even if the state refuses to make these reparations. I think that this is an economical mean through which we can prevent the state to use the popular sovereignty excuse to repair human rights violations.
Great, thank you, Luis. So today's session was about human rights, and we had our two wonderful speakers, Isabella. She's already running late, so she had to leave our live session. But of course, thanks to Isabella for her insightful perspectives, all information, and of course to Luis, who is still here with us. Thank you very much for all your information, all your perspectives on human rights, and I believe our viewers really enjoyed. Um, all speaking about human rights. I want to thank our viewers also for watching us. So at this point, I would like to, I think we can have a minute to see the question of our viewers. Um, if I go to the comment section, there is, yes, most of us, we have already answered that. Okay, so I got one question from the viewer. As young people, what practical steps do you think we can take in our daily lives to protect and promote human rights in our communities? So this person is a student of college in Pakistan and she observes a lot. So uh, I think it's he. So if you can answer this question, and it's also for the other viewers that they can take along in their journey.
Sure. So, though human rights are often thought as universal principles, they have to be exercised locally since they are lived differently in each community. So, I think that precisely this is the way to approach the diffusion of human rights in our communities. And as young people, we have as Isabella was saying, we are digital natives. So, we can use our social media to approach our close communities to teach or to interfere when someone raises their voice regarding some human rights violations. And human rights violations do not come like in these massive uh, forms which we can see often in social media or traditional media. Violation of human rights are in every day. We just have to be critical. For example, we can see here in the street, I see that there is a bridge which people cannot cross. We That's a clear violation of our human rights to mobility. How is that being interfering to the rights of people with disabilities or elder people which have mobility uh, limitations? There's where perspective of disability or perspective of elderness come when we are analyzing the right for mobility in this example. So we have to be critical, and as youth we have to use our competences as digital natives and the energy we have to share the knowledge we have with our close social circles.
Thank you, Luis. So we have come to an end of our session, Human Rights, and on behalf of IYC and the IYC team, I would like to thank our panelists for your powerful insights and all of our viewers who have been engaging in this conversation. Thank you for your questions and all of your wonderful comments. So what we have here today is clear. Young people are not only advocates, they are defenders of dignity and justice. To strengthen this role, we need to break down barriers, protect human rights defenders, and embrace innovative tools that amplify their voices. So, this session reminds us that human rights are not abstract, they are lived realities, and youth must be at the center of shaping frameworks that safeguard freedoms for generations to come. So, yes, let's carry this energy forward into our work and for tomorrow and beyond and future. So, once again, thank you very much for watching us. And from the team of IYC, we would like to thank you to join us today for this session, Human Rights. So, thank you very much, Luis. And our viewers, please stay tuned for our next panel sessions.
Thank you, Dia.